Mr. Chairman and Chairwoman Lofgren. This has been fascinating hearing, but it's the American Enterprise Institute's witness, Mr. Theodore Frank, that compels my attention most. With such minimal requirements for recovery and such potentially broad definitions of eligibility, taxpayers may find themselves paying for psychotherapy for Woody Allen and hundreds of thousands of other New Yorkers, many of whom are among the wealthiest people in the nation. Well, I introduce you to the person on your right. A police officer is not one of those in that category. I hope not.
Well, can I answer?
When I recognize you to answer, when I finish, Mr. Feinberg, you've been around. What is this? Did you have a wide open policy? Were you letting every psychotic New Yorker that wanted to climb on board? Well, not that there are many of them in New York. Don't get me wrong, Mr. Wiener.
I thank the chairman.
What's going on here?
The 9/11 statute, Mr. Chairman, did not allow, statutorily, did not allow any compensation for mental trauma alone. There had to be, under the 9/11 fund, a physical injury, a broken leg, a burn, a respiratory claim, corroborated by doctors. So we didn't pay any psychotherapy, mental trauma claims. They were ineligible.
Mm-hmm. Feeling better, Mr. Frank?
No, sir, because Section 203 of H.R. 3543 opens up the fund to precisely the injury that the Stabilization Act forbid, which was physically or psychologically injured. And given the fact that the New York City disaster area goes well beyond Mr. Valentin, who is perfectly entitled to compensation to the extent his injuries were caused by the problems of working on Ground Zero, and I have no dispute with that, and I say that in my testimony. But that's not what H.R. 3543 does. It is substantially broader than that, and if you want to fund that, Mr. Valentin, that doesn't require you to open up Section 203 to half of Manhattan.
Okay, so you've got it in for people who may have psychological or mental injuries that are derivative from the basic claim. So you want to take all of them out. In other words, do you have medical background?
Sir, I explained in my testimony why this
I just asked you the question.
I do not have a medical background.
Okay, I don't either.
And I see what happens when you have broad...
Well, just a moment now. Here's the problem. I could agree with you to an extent, but who am I or you to determine that there are other kinds of injuries? It just so happened over the weekend, and this is a fortuitous circumstance, I spoke before the Detroit chapter of the American Psychiatric Association. So as a disclaimer, I'm not carrying any of their water or trying to help them in any way. But don't you see a relationship, a possible relationship between mental and physical injury? Is that conceivable?
Well, certainly. In the original 9/11 funds, when people had physical injury and asked for compensation, they were also compensated for their non-economic mental injuries. And that was in the statute, and that was in the definition of how non-economic injury was defined in the Stabilization Act, and they were compensated for that.
So you go along with that, but you think that this bill now has gone a little bit too far, or a lot too far?
You're holding up Mr. Valentin as who you want to help, but that's not who this bill helps. It helps many hundreds of thousands of people beyond that. It helps in terms of just giving away taxpayer money.
Well, Carolyn Maloney has never given away a dime in taxpayers' money, not even to New Yorkers who were psychos. But I mean, the problem that we're faced with is how do we address your problem now? you're talking with some of the most veteran lawmakers, including my friends on the other side who may not be lawyers, but and they have a little feeling and attitude about lawyers that we'll talk about later. But the fact of the matter is, couldn't you trust it in our tender hands to create a bill that would meet the objections? Because I don't want to be giving out money in the fashion that you derive. I mean, who Woody Allen? He ought to be helping us, not us helping him.
Well, that's what I try to do in my written testimony, sir, where I identify the problems in the existing legislation and what Congress needs to do to correct them. Even Mr. Feinberg agreed with me that opening up psychological injury without proof of physical injury would be a huge can of worms.
Well, Mr. Feinberg, let me just close with this question. Do you see a relationship between mental and physical injuries? I mean, people can get hurt in a lot of ways.
Of course. There's a relationship. Of course. The 9/11 Fund statute did not permit compensation for pure mental trauma without an accompanying physical injury. So if you reenact the 9/11 statute and add to it mental trauma without physical injury, that would be a major shift from the original statute.
Would you accept an invitation from the American Psychiatric Association in my place next year when they meet?
Mr. Chairman, anything you ask me to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.